Imagine this. A power-hungry HOA president illegally demolishes a man's dream cabin over a few disputed dollars, thinking he was an easy target. She sneers as the cabin comes down, absolutely confident in the power she holds in her tiny kingdom. What she doesn't know is that this man's family isn't just going to send a strongly worded letter. His family is filled with federal agents, and they are about to turn his personal fight for justice into a federal case that won't just rebuild his cabin, it will tear her entire corrupt empire down to the studs. What would you do if a power-mad HOA president destroyed not just your home, but your family's legacy? Let's dive into this incredible story of how a fight over HOA fees allegedly became a full-blown federal investigation. Disclaimer: the story you're about to hear is not a documented news report. No evidence has been found of a real-life Maurice Landry or Beverly Hensley, and the events described have not been verified in court records or news articles. This tale, which has captured the imagination of many online, should be seen as a powerful piece of modern folklore, a revenge fantasy for anyone who has ever felt powerless against a petty tyrant. It's a story about what happens when a bully pushes the wrong person way too far. Our story begins not with anger and rubble, but with peace and the quiet lapping of water on a cypress-lined shore. The protagonist of our tale is Maurice Landry, a man whose character was forged in hard work and a deep-rooted love for his family. For years, he poured every spare dollar and every weekend into a single dream, a small cabin on the banks of Caddo Lake in Louisiana. This wasn't just any plot of land, it was a legacy. It was the place his grandfather had taught him to fish. With a scent of pine and damp earth was the smell of home. Maurice wanted to build a physical connection to that history, a place for his own kids and grandkids. The cabin rose from the ground slowly, built with the painstaking precision of a labor of love. Maurice was there for every step. He chose each piece of timber. He framed the structure himself, and even learned to wire the electricity, staying up late with books and diagrams. He built a porch with his own two hands, the one that would face the sunset over the lake, already picturing himself sitting there after a long day. It was modest, but to Maurice, it was a mansion of memories waiting to happen. The windows were large, framing the spectacular, moss-draped cypress trees Caddo Lake is famous for. It wasn't just a structure. It was the culmination of a lifetime of quiet aspiration. For the most part, the surrounding community reflected the lake's tranquility. There was, of course, a homeowners association, a feature of the newer developments around older plots like Morris's. In the beginning, the HOA was just background noise, collecting modest fees to maintain the main road. The newsletters were filled with benign reminders about trash day. Maurice paid his dues on time, every time, and thought nothing of it. He had no reason to suspect this organization was slowly transforming into a tool for one woman's tyrannical ambition. The serpent in Eden, Beverly Hensley. Every paradise has its serpent, and in this Caddo Lake community, the serpent wore floral blouses and a permanent, condescending smirk. Her name was Beverly Hensley, the president of the HOA. To a casual observer, she might have seemed like a pillar of the community, but to those who'd crossed her, she was a petty tyrant, a classic Karen, who wielded the HOA's book of bylaws like a scepter. She had risen to power through attrition and intimidation. HOA meetings became her courtroom, where she exploited vague rules and weaponized technicalities. If you painted your mailbox the wrong shade of beige, you didn't just get a notice, you became a project. She derived her power not from consent, but from the exhaustion of her neighbors. Most people found it easier to just pay the fine and avoid her gaze. Over time, she populated the HOA board with her cronies, turning it into her own personal monarchy. For Maurice Landry, the first sign of trouble arrived in a crisp, white envelope. It was a formal notice from the HOA stating he was delinquent on his fees. Maurice was bewildered. He was meticulous, and he knew he'd sent the check weeks ago. He checked his bank records, sure enough. The check had been cashed. He assumed it was a simple mistake and called the number on the notice. Beverly Hensley herself answered, her voice dripping with a fake, sugary politeness that set him on edge. Maurice politely explained the situation, offering to email her proof that the check was cashed. Beverly's response was a masterclass in passive-aggressive stonewalling. "Well, Mr. Landry," she began, "our records are very clear. We show no payment for that period. Perhaps you made an error." "I'm looking at the cash check right now," Maurice insisted, his voice calm but firm. "It was endorsed by the HOA. There was a pause, then a sigh of pure performance. "The bylaws state that payments must be received by the first of the month. If it arrives even one day late, a late fee is automatically assessed. The rules are the rules, Mr. Landry. We can't make exceptions just because someone doesn't understand them." The fee was tiny, but it was the principle of the thing. More than that, it was her tone. In that moment, this was no longer about a late fee. Beverly Hensley had sized him up. As a black man with a cabin on a historic plot of land, she saw him as an outsider who didn't fit into her perfect, homogeneous community. She thought he would be like the others, that he would grumble, but ultimately, he would fall in line. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Beverly Hensley did not like being questioned. Morris's refusal to simply roll over was an act of defiance, and in her kingdom, that required punishment. The bogus late fee was just the opening shot in what became a relentless campaign of targeted harassment. The fines began to multiply. The initial fee was soon joined by a noncompliance fine, then daily compounded interest. Within a month, a disputed $20 had ballooned into several hundred. The official-looking letters became a regular, sickening feature in Morris's mailbox. Beverly's focus then expanded to his property. Armed with her clipboard and a measuring tape, she became a constant, menacing presence. One week, a notice appeared claiming his grass was a quarter of an inch too high. He mowed it. The next week, another notice arrived. A violation for improper disposal of lawn clippings because a few blades landed on the driveway. The violations became more and more absurd. He got a fine for a fishing lure dropped on his own dock, deemed unauthorized debris. He received a warning that the stain on his cabin's porch wasn't on the pre-approved list of acceptable earth tones, a list she refused to provide him. The psychological toll was immense. The cabin, once a sanctuary, began to feel like a prison. He felt a knot in his stomach every time he saw Beverly's golf cart creeping down the road. Friendly neighbors started to avoid eye contact, terrified of becoming her next target. Meanwhile, Beverly's husband, who owned a local contracting company, became her unofficial enforcer. His company, Hensley Home Solutions, conveniently received every contract the HOA awarded, always at inflated prices. Now he'd park down the road from Morris's cabin, aiming a long-lens camera, a blatant act of intimidation. Maurice decided to fight back. He prepared a detailed file for the next HOA meeting, with copies of cashed checks and photos. It was a complete farce. The board, full of Beverly's cronies, dismissed his evidence without a glance. He was shouted down. Desperate, he sought legal advice, but the lawyer's conclusion was disheartening. Fighting an HOA was a nightmare, he was told. She would use the HOA's own funds to bury him in legal fees. It could take years and cost a fortune. With Morris's options dwindling, Beverly escalated. The letters now threatened a lien on his property. In a chilling conversation, she looked him dead in the eye and said, "You know, that cabin of yours has brought a lot of problems. It might be better for everyone if it just wasn't here." The threat, no longer veiled, hung in the air. Section 4 of the demolition. The breaking point came when Maurice had to leave town for a week for a family emergency. He asked a supportive neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Gable, to keep an eye on the place. He had a terrible feeling his absence would be seen as an opportunity. He was right. For days into his trip, his phone rang. It was a panicked Mrs. Gable. "Maurice, you have to come back. Beverly is here with a bulldozer." Morris's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about, a bulldozer?" "She's tearing it down, Maurice. She's tearing down your cabin." The scene at Caddo Lake was one of shocking brutality. A massive yellow bulldozer from Hensley Home Solutions was parked on Morris's lawn. Beverly stood with her arms crossed, a triumphant, venomous smile on her face. When a neighbor asked what was happening, Beverly announced loudly. "This is a condemned structure." The board voted for its immediate removal. This was a complete lie. There was no vote. There were no missing permits. Research into the story suggests that when a reputable demolition company refused the job without a court order, Beverly simply called her husband, whose crew arrived within the hour, no questions asked. On the phone, Mrs. Gable described the horrific sounds: the crunch of wood, the shatter of glass, the groan of the cabin's frame as the bulldozer's blade tore into the porch he had built with his own hands. She watched as the walls collapsed, as the roof caved in, as a lifetime of dreams was reduced to a heap of splintered wood. Maurice drove through the night, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When he finally arrived, the sun was rising. The bulldozer was gone. Beverly was gone. And so was his cabin. Where his home once stood, there was now just a chaotic pile of rubble. He walked through the debris in a daze. He saw the shattered frame of the window that had looked out over the lake. He saw the crushed remains of a rocking chair he'd inherited from his grandfather. Kneeling in the dirt, his hand brushed against a small, silver locket he'd planned to give his daughter, now bent and tarnished. As he clutched it, his grief began to cool and harden into something else entirely. A cold, pure, unshakable resolve. Beverly Hensley had made a fatal miscalculation. She thought that by destroying his home, she had won. But what she had actually done was declare war on the wrong family. Section 5. The cavalry arrives. Standing amidst the ruins of his dream, Maurice made a phone call. Not to the local police, and not to the lawyer who'd told him the fight was hopeless. He called his older brother David. The raw, broken grief in his voice was enough. "She did it, David." She tore it down. "I'm on my way," was the immediate reply. "Call Sarah. Call Marcus. Tell them to meet me there. We're done defending. Now we act." Within 24 hours, the cavalry arrived. They didn't come with sirens, but in unassuming sedans, their faces grim. This was Morris's secret weapon, the ace up his sleeve Beverly could never have imagined. His family wasn't just supportive. They were a federal task force in miniature. David Landry was a senior special agent in the FBI's public corruption unit. His sister, Sarah, was a forensic accountant with the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division. And their cousin, Marcus, was a sharp prosecutor with the Department of Justice, specializing in organized crime. They gathered around a table, the bent silver locket sitting in the center. As Maurice recounted the entire story, they listened with the trained ears of investigators, recognizing the patterns of a criminal conspiracy. When he finished, David spoke, his voice low and dangerous. This wasn't just illegal, it was arrogant. And arrogance always leaves a trail. The letters demanding money for fake violations? That's mail fraud. The electronic payments she manipulated? Wire fraud. The pattern of intimidation? That's racketeering. Sarah, the IRS agent, chimed in. And the husband's company. I'd bet she's been awarding him no-bid contracts at inflated prices for years, then skimming the profits. That's money laundering and tax evasion. She's not just an HOA president. She's running a criminal enterprise. Marcus, the prosecutor, nodded. We can build a RICO case. The Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act was designed for exactly this. The HOA is the enterprise. Beverly is the boss. Her husband and the board are the soldiers. The plan was cold and precise. Publicly, Maurice would file a massive civil lawsuit. But privately, a silent, methodical federal investigation would begin. The personal fight for a demolished cabin was officially going federal. The federal master plan. While Beverly Hensley was basking in her victory, a storm of federal power was gathering silently. She had no idea her every financial transaction, every email, and every threat was about to come under the most intense scrutiny imaginable. First, Sarah, the forensic accountant, obtained years of the HOA's financial records, Beverly's tax returns, and the books for Hensley Home Solutions. For a professional, the documents were a confession written in black ink. She discovered a clear pattern of bid rigging and kickbacks. Beverly would solicit 3 bids for HOA projects, But 2 were always ghosts, sham quotes from non-existent companies. The third bid, always the winner, was from her husband's company, and it was always wildly inflated. The money would be paid to her husband, and a portion was then funneled back to Beverly. Simultaneously, David, the FBI agent, started quietly on the ground, posing as insurance investigators looking into the demolition. He and a colleague began interviewing neighbors. Freed from the fear of Beverly's retribution, the residents began to talk, telling stories of extortion and cash demands. The most crucial testimony came from the owner of the first demolition company Beverly had contacted. Presented with an FBI request, the owner provided a sworn affidavit stating that Beverly had explicitly pressured him to demolish the cabin without a court order. It was the smoking gun, but the most damning evidence was found deep within the HOA's accounting software. The initial dispute, the claim that Maurice had paid his fees late, was a deliberate falsification. Using her forensic tools, Sarah recovered the software's edit logs. The record showed that Morris's payment had been received on time. 3 days later, the log showed a manual entry from Beverly's IP address, altering the date to make it appear late. She had digitally fabricated the very premise of her campaign against him. With this mountain of evidence, Marcus, the DOJ prosecutor, assembled the RICO case. The Caddo Lake HOA was, by federal definition, a criminal enterprise. All the while, Beverly and her husband remained blissfully unaware, fighting Morris's civil suit and portraying him as a disgruntled homeowner. They had no idea a federal grand jury was meeting in secret. They believed they were the hunters, but in reality, they had long since become the prey. Judgment Day. The end came on a calm Tuesday morning. A series of black SUVs from the FBI and IRS rolled silently into the neighborhood. Beverly was on her porch, sipping coffee, when the first SUV pulled into her driveway. A man in a crisp suit stepped out, held up a badge, and said, "Beverly Hensley, you have a federal warrant for your arrest." The color drained from her face. She and her husband were placed in handcuffs on their own manicured lawn as the neighbors she had terrorized watched in stunned silence. The federal indictment was unsealed, charging Beverly, her husband, and 2 board members with conspiracy to violate the RICO Act, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. The trial was a methodical presentation of an airtight case. Neighbor after neighbor took the stand, detailing the pattern of extortion. Sarah, the forensic accountant, presented her analysis on a large screen, showing the flow of laundered money. Then, she showed the jury the final slide, a screenshot of the accounting software's log, showing Beverly's IP address manually altering the date of Morris's payment. It was the digital fingerprint of the crime. Beverly's expensive defense lawyer tried to argue it was all a series of misunderstandings, but the arguments fell apart. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was read in a silent courtroom. On the charge of RICO conspiracy, the jury find the defendant, Beverly Hensley, guilty. The clerk continued down the list. Guilty, guilty, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge did not hold back, calling her actions a cancer on the community. He sentenced Beverly and her husband to significant prison time, and in the final blow, he ordered the forfeiture of all their assets traceable to the criminal enterprise, their house, their cars, their bank accounts. Everything they had built on a foundation of corruption was stripped away. In the aftermath, the Caddo Lake HOA was dissolved, its reign of terror over. The residents, finally free, elected a new board with one mission, to be fair and transparent. But the story doesn't end there. The U.S. Marshals Service seized every dollar Beverly and her husband had hidden away, and a substantial portion was allocated for restitution. The primary recipient was Maurice Landry. He was awarded more than enough money not just to cover his pain and suffering, but to rebuild. The final scene is one of quiet triumph. Maurice stands on the porch of his new cabin, identical to the one he lost, but with stronger foundations. He holds the small, bent locket, a reminder not of what was lost, but of the strength it took to fight back. The sun sets over Caddo Lake, the same peaceful view he had always dreamed of. His home is rebuilt, his legacy is secure, and the serpent has been permanently cast out of paradise. It's a powerful story of how a bully picked on the wrong person and discovered that justice, sometimes, comes from the most unexpected places. It's a reminder that no matter how small the kingdom, a tyrant is still a tyrant, and that no one is above the law.